YouTube. Welcome to the channel. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for being here and watching. Today is a big day. Today is July 11th, and there are a lot of awesome things going on today. So first up, we have a big patch that's coming out today, and I already made a video going over all the details and all the changes of the patch, so please go check that out if you haven't seen it yet. I'll put a link to that right up here. In case you haven't seen any of my other previous streams, you can find the VODs at the link up here. And one more thing, we're going to be doing the final tier list today for all the units combined together, and we're going to be looking over them, comparing and contrasting them, and seeing how they stack up against one another. And so I already did a previous tier list video for each of the different categories that they have. So if you haven't seen that yet, please check that out as well, and here's another link for that. And I want to add that if you enjoy all this stuff, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and there's going to be a lot more coming your way. So I think that's it. Without any further ado, let's get into the big one here, the big tier list. Here it is. So first up, we'll start out with the Advanced Blink. I guess one more thing I want to add is that as I do this tier list, I might move things around a little bit since there's just so much to cover and go over. We'll kind of see as we move along here if I want to change things up and move things around. So let's start with the Advanced Blink. The Advanced Blink, I think I will start that out in the A tier here. I've used the Advanced Blink quite a bit, and I've seen them used quite a bit as well, so I really enjoy them. I like using them, they're a lot of fun, and I think they're really strong. They are a pretty beefy, tanky unit, actually, especially for the cost. They're on the cheaper side, so it's easier to build up a big mass of these, and they can shoot up or down at air targets or ground targets, and they have really good DPS against both, too. Usually, anti-air units typically will do more damage against the air units, and then they're a little bit weaker to the ground units. However, I believe for the Advanced Blink, it's about the same, actually. The same DPS shooting up or down, so they're just a very good all-around unit. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Blink. They're the Advanced Blink's weaker counterpart. So the Blink, I think I'm going to have to put them in the B tier. The Blink is pretty good all around. It's just neither great or bad. It has decent stats, and it's not the best in any regard. But the strong point of the Blink is that blink ability, of course. So if you're very good at microing your units and positioning them correctly, you can really use that to the blink ability to your advantage to catch your opponent off guard. And either you can use it as a better way of kiting, and then you can teleport away to safety, or you can jump in on your opponent when they're least expecting it and pick off a few units. So for that reason, I think that puts them in the B tier, because otherwise their stats I think would be just a little bit lacking, but the blink ability itself I think makes up for that. Next up we have the Falcon, and the Falcon, I'm going to put that in the S tier. The Falcon is one of my favorite units to use. It's just a very strong anti-ground air unit, especially in the tier 2 slot. Oftentimes people seem to underestimate the Falcon. The Falcon just has way more DPS, and it's way tankier than you would really expect. And so I think it just really catches people off guard. They'll see you trying to make these, and they'll try to counter it with their tier 1 anti-air units. And most of the time that doesn't go very well for them. So the Falcon's just a little too tanky and does a little too much damage for those tier 1 units. But the Falcon, for me and my experience, has been one of the best units in the game for sure. So I think it's definitely worthy of that S tier. Next up, we have the King Crab. I think I will put the King Crab in the A tier. It'll probably wind up in the lower end of A, possibly even high B. We'll see as we go, but I do really like the King Crab, and it can be very strong in the right situation. It's pretty fast for the most part, it's tanky, and it has really, really good DPS. The only drawbacks to it are that it's a melee unit, and it's also really big and bulky, so it can be really difficult to maneuver this thing around the map sometimes, depending on what your opponent has and what they are putting in its way. So it's really hard to get around some of those other tank units that your opponent might have, and to get the King Crab on top of some of the more vulnerable targets that you want to go for. The King Crab, though, I would say is very good at actually like sneak attacking your opponent's resource spaces. You could either send one King Crab in there to wipe out all the workers real quick, or you could send in 4 or 5 of them to destroy an entire resource space very fast. Next up, let's talk about the Scorpion. And so the Scorpion, in my opinion, for a core unit is going to be A tier. It's going to be a high A tier. The Scorpion is very strong unit in my opinion. It's very tanky for its cost, and has very good DPS for its cost as well. It's got good speed, but the drawback again is that it's a melee unit. So the melee units can struggle a little bit against those ranged units. If your opponent is microing properly and kiting your melee units, it can be pretty difficult to get your units on top of them. So definitely keep that in mind if you're playing the Scorpions. However, I just think they're all around a very strong and solid unit. And I've even found that these are pretty good for taking out opponents' resource spaces pretty quickly too if they're not paying attention. You could send in, maybe like 15 to 20 of these onto a resource space, and most of the time they'll take out that resource space before your opponent can destroy them all. So they have good DPS, so you can get a little creative with these. They also kind of function as a poor man's tank. If you want to mass up a bunch of these to act as a cheap tank for some of your other backline units, they can be pretty good at that. Next up, we have the Advanced Recall, and the Advanced Recall is actually getting a little bit of a buff in today's patch. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how it plays out. But I think the Advanced Recall is pretty good in the B tier here. The Advanced Recall has really high single target DPS, and they're pretty cheap. So that's about all they have going for them, I think. Of course, they have the recall ability as well, which is very good. However, the problem I always have with these is that as I start massing these up, my opponent will typically be running some kind of AoE damage, and they just get melted and destroyed by AoE damage. So it's I've found it difficult to work these into a deck and find a good place for them. If you have had any good experiences with these or found a good deck that works with these, please let me know in the comments below. I would be very happy to hear about that and see what you guys are up to in that regard. So yeah, I think I'll have to leave the Advanced Recall in the B tier, and let's move on then to the Dragonfly. Dragonfly, I think I'll have to put at the top of A tier. The Dragonfly is very strong, and especially in the right hands. I've had some pretty good success with these, but I'm not the best at maneuvering these around and microing and multitasking, and so the strong suit of the Dragonflies is just how fast they are, and they do really good DPS to both air and ground units. However, they are a little on the squishy side, so that's why you got to be very careful with these. But they're so fast, and they can wipe out a base really quickly, so in the right hands, if somebody's multitasking well enough with these, they can be all over the map, taking out all sorts of different resource spaces or workers, or doing a flyby over the opponent's army and taking them out. So for that reason, I think I got to give the Dragonfly the A tier. All right, and so next up, let's do the Hunter here. The Hunter, in comparison to everything, I think I'll probably have to put the Hunter into the C tier. All around, their stats are fine. Nothing special, but nothing terrible either. However, compared to the other options, there's just nothing unique that stands out about these. So, I think C tier is kind of either about these types of units that just don't have anything unique or special going for them, or it's going to be for the units that are very niche and fill like only one specific role, and they're not even that great at it, that type of thing. So Hunter definitely, I think, falls into the category of not being anything special or unique, not really that good at anything, and so it's just all around fine. And there's just it doesn't have one of those abilities to blink or recall, overclock, something like that to help it stand out from the rest. So I think that's all I got to say about the Hunter. So let's talk about the Mortar next. The Mortar, I think I'm gonna have to put that into the S tier, even ahead of the Falcon. The Mortar is, in my opinion, got to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest, AoE damage units in the game. And they also have just so much range on top of that. So it's just so difficult getting on top of these to destroy them before they wipe out your entire army. So for me, S tier just seems right for the Mortar. It's one of the first things I look for when I check what my opponent's running. So yeah, it's the Mortars. They're definitely a powerhouse. Next up, we have the Recall Hunter. The Recall Hunter also got a little bit of a nerf recently, and so I think I'll put the Recall Hunter in the top of B for now. They're definitely a very strong Tier 1 anti-air unit. So if you're looking for a cheap Tier 1 anti-air unit, Recall Hunter might be one of the better options now. They are able to recall to any of your resource spaces, so if your opponent is running something like the Butterflies or the Dragonflies, the Recall Hunter can be a very good option for you to defend against those flyby raids that they might try to pull on you. So the Recall Hunter is very good for that, and I don't think there's much more to say about that, so let's just move on to the Recalls. And the Recall, I think I'll put the Recall maybe at the low end of S. So it's tough to compare the recall to something like a mortar, but I'm trying to take into consideration the cost of the unit, and then also where the unit is. The recall is one of the tier 1 core units, and it's also very cheap compared to something like the mortar, of course, because of its effectiveness compared to its cost, and for how good it is compared to the other tier 1 core units. In my opinion, the recall is one of the best options. It's also very good if you're someone like me who's not as good at micring. You can mass up a big group of these, and you can stutter step a little bit with these, and kite units a bit with these. If you get into too much trouble with them, you can just use their ability to recall out of there and back to safety. So that's the great thing about these is they're just such a safe and easy unit to use, and once you build up a big enough army of these, they can just kind of mow down and wipe everything out. And let's move on to the sniper now. The sniper, I think I'll have to put that in the A tier. We will put that above the scorpion. So the sniper is, kind of exactly what you would expect for a unit called sniper. It's very good at picking off your opponent's important units that they're trying to protect. The sniper has the range to basically reach from your backline to their backline, making it very good and effective at picking off those units. So it's especially good against the mortars. And so let's move on to the turret here. The turret, I think I'll have to put in the C tier. I've seen some people use the turrets fairly well and fairly effectively, but I've never really seen them, dominate a game, or I've never seen them, win somebody a game, or be better than some other, option that they could have had instead of that. So for that, I gotta put them in the C tier. They're very niche. Next up, we have the airship. The airship, I think I'll put the airship at the top of A. The airship is the tier 2 anti-air unit that you want if you want to shut down your opponent from going air. I really like the airship. I think it's very strong, especially for that tier 2 slot, and so I think it's worthy of the A tier. All right, so next up is the artillery. The artillery, I think I'll put that in the B tier. Yeah, I'll put that at the top of B tier. The artillery can be very strong. It does really good AoE damage from pretty far distance. I just think that there's a lot of competition for the AoE damage units, and so it's hard for me to justify, putting it up any higher than this. In fact, as we go, it might even drop down a little bit. However, the one interesting thing about this is that it's actually in the tier 3 advanced Starforge category. I believe it's one of the only AoE damage units in Starforge, if not the only one. And so I think there might be a place for this in certain decks, depending on what else you're running. And so it's kind of interesting to have that option, an AoE damage option in the Starforge. Just for me personally, though, I'm usually wanting to run more air units in my Starforge slot. So that's why, for me, it doesn't quite make the cut. And so let's move on to the ballista. And the ballista, I'm going to have to put that at the very low end of B, almost in C, actually. Yeah, I think I'll just put it in C, because the ballista just doesn't have anything real unique going for it. It's got decent AoE damage. It just doesn't have anything else going for it, really. It's slow. It doesn't have a lot of range. It isn't that durable. And so there's just, like I said, a lot of competition in this AoE damage category, and so I think there's just a lot of better options. There's no unique ability to this thing or anything like that, no unique stats really or anything, so I think it's going to have to be in the C tier. Let's move on to the Behemoth. The Behemoth is one of my new favorite units. I still haven't used it a ton because I find there are some better options in my opinion. However, I think I'll put the Behemoth at the top of A. Actually, maybe I'll put it underneath the airship. And the best thing probably about this then is that it only costs matter. It doesn't cost any energy. So it's a great replacement for your tier 1 core units. Instead of using scorpions or crabs or recalls or anything of that nature late game, you can start pumping out these behemoths instead. And they should be far more effective than your tier 1 core units. So I think the behemoth is great for that, and I've had a lot of fun using it and running it. So I think that's a very good, strong option. And so next, let's talk about the Blink Hunter. I'm gonna have to put the Blink Hunter at the top of B, I think, and I think I'll put the Recall Hunter right behind it actually as well. I almost want to put these into the A tier. because they are, I think, two of the better options right now for the tier 1 anti-air units. The only issue is, they fall off late game against some tougher air units. So these things will have a hard time going up against, the Cat Bus, the Falcon, and even maybe the Locust as well. Assuming, of course, your opponent is able to mass up a big enough group of these units. It's going to be difficult for your tier 1 anti-air units to counter those. But these are very good and effective for countering most of the tier 2 air units, and I think the Blink Hunter is probably one of the best, if not the best, anti-air tier 1 unit right now, and mostly because of that blink ability. Oftentimes what your opponents will do with something like the butterflies or the dragonflies is they'll set them off of the map, but very close to one of your resource spaces and all of your workers. And they'll try to real quickly run past your workers, or they'll kind of move them in and out of range of the workers to try to pick a few off real quick. And so it's very difficult to defend against that unless you have Blink Hunters, in my opinion, because your opponent might underestimate the Blink Hunter and just how quick and how far they're able to blink and get into range of their air units. So let's move on to the Butterfly. The Butterfly, I think I'll put that in the B tier, just ahead of the Blink. I find with the Butterflies, they usually just get easily countered by the tier 1 anti-air units. So I find it very difficult to use the Butterflies. The Dragonfly, I think, is a better option just because of how quick it is. And, it's a little more versatile, being able to shoot up and down as well. But the Butterflies, being a little bit slower than the Dragonfly, just seem to easily get countered and picked off by the tier 1 anti-air options. So for that reason, I'll put the Butterfly at the low end of B here. And next up, we have the Crab, the good old Crab. The Crab, I think, is, kind of right in the middle of B. So I think I'll put the Crab right here for now, in the B tier. It's just a very average all-around core unit, and it's got decent DPS, it's got really good health. However, it's a melee unit, so it's going to be vulnerable to your opponent's ranged units that can kite these things. So that being said, you can't underestimate the Crabs either, though. There's many times where I've actually lost a game because I underestimated the Crab and just how tanky it is. So it can function pretty well as a poor man's tank, basically, if you want to mass up a bunch of these Crabs instead of going something like the Crusader and use these as your tank unit for your backline. They can function pretty well in that regard. So for that, I think I will give them the B tier. And next up, if you've watched some high-level gameplay, I'm sure you have seen the Gunbots. I'm going to have to put the Gunbot in the S tier, and I'll even put them above the Recall. The Gunbot is just the best tier 1 core unit overall, assuming that you're good enough microing these and multitasking with these. They are super strong if you build up a big enough number, and with the overclock ability, they can pretty much take out any other tier 1 core unit. Again, though, this is going to rely heavily on your skill to be able to micro these. Next up, we have the Heavy Hunter. The Heavy Hunter, I believe, is also getting a little bit of a buff, and I think it's making them pretty good now. So I think I'll put them at the top of B. Maybe they'll sneak into low A. They are extremely good at doing what they're supposed to do, which is, of course, countering air units. They are going to be lacking, though, in most other situations. They're not going to be as good against the ground units. But, if you really want to shut down your opponent from going air, then this is a pretty sure way to do that. So next up, we have the Heavy Turret, and I'll put the Heavy Turret a little above the turret, I guess. It's basically the same thing. It's a little bit better, but it functions in the same way as the turret. It's a versatile defense option that can shoot up or down, but that's all it can be used for, is defense and for defending one of your resource bases or your core main base. So for me, I like to have options that are going to be much more useful in various different situations, as well as being able to be more aggressive with them. And so I just find it hard to justify a slot for the Heavy Turret. So for that reason, I'll leave it at the C tier. And so next up, we have the Hornet. And I've actually been seeing the Hornet used a little bit more lately. So I think I'll put the Hornet just below the Recall Hunter. The Hornet can be great in a lot of situations just because of how fast it is. And it's actually got pretty good DPS as well against both air and ground units too. So it can be used in a lot of different situations. The only problem is that it's going to be very squishy, and it will die very quickly and easily to a lot of other things, including even tier 2 air options as well. So It's a tier 1 anti-air unit that is so squishy that it can actually, die pretty quickly and easily to a lot of tier 2 air options. Assuming that they have enough of these units masked up, you just have to be very careful with the Hornets because of how squishy they are. In the right hands, though, if you're able to multitask very well with these, and if you're able to micro these extremely effectively, then you will be able to take out a lot of different units, and you'll be able to trade very efficiently with these. Let's move on to the big boy, the Kraken. And so, yeah, the Kraken, unfortunately, is not going to rank very high for me. And, honestly, I think I'll even put it in the D tier. I think maybe you can make this work in the 2v2 games, but for 1v1s in a serious competitive environment, it's just going to be almost impossible, I think, to really pull this off and get this out. The Kraken is by far the most expensive unit in the game, and of course it's extremely powerful. If you were able to get this out, it should basically win you the game. It'll destroy everything in its path and destroy your opponent's base very quickly. So it's a very cool unit, a very fun unit. I'm glad it's in the game, but as I said before in my previous tier list video, I think the Kraken would be a bit more interesting and a bit more fun if it was actually nerfed a bit, and maybe the stats were reduced in half or something. Then you could reduce the cost in half, and then maybe you'd be able to get this out a little bit more. So let's move on then to the Locust, and the Locust is a tough one. I almost want to put this in the S tier. I'm not sure if I can. I think I'll have to put it at the top of A. I think the Locust is going to fall just a little bit short of the S tier because of just how squishy it is. And so it can die pretty quickly to a lot of different anti-air options, so you do need to be careful with it. But it's basically just a dragonfly on steroids, as I've said before. And it's very versatile, it's very fast, it can shoot up and down, has really good DPS, and so it's very good at catching your opponent off guard. It can take out bases very quickly, workers really quickly, and it can do flybys over your opponent's army and pick off a bunch of units that way as well. And even if you get a big enough group of these built up, they can even take out a lot of anti-air options. So I think it's just a matter of skill, how much you're able to multitask with these and micro with these, as well as is your opponent going to allow you enough space and room to build up a big enough mass of these to really be as strong as they can be. But the Locust is very fun. It's one of my favorite units, and I think it's very good at doing what it does. So top of A, I think, is a great spot for that. And let's move on to the Missile Bot. And the Missile Bot has recently gotten some nerfs, and so I think for that reason, I have to put the Missile Bot below the Hornet. The Missile Bot, prior to the nerfs it's gotten, in my opinion, was the best anti-air unit by far. It had very good DPS against both air and ground units, and I think it still does, and maybe it's just my perception has changed because of the patch and because of the slight nerf they got. So don't take my word for it necessarily. They might still be the best. It just doesn't feel like that to me anymore. For that reason, I'll put them below the Hornet, but just keep that in mind. It might be my own personal bias swaying a little bit against them now at this point. Next up, let's talk about the Predator. And so the Predator is also kind of a tough one for me to figure out where to place it. I think I'll put them at the high end of B for now. The Predator to me just seems like the Heavy Hunter, but even better in my opinion. The Predator has very good DPS, and it can shoot both up and down, so it's especially effective at countering air units. However, again, similar to the Heavy Hunter, it's niche in that way that you're mostly going to be wanting to use this as an anti-air unit. And so, in my opinion, there's just usually better options to run for anti-air, and to me, the Predator, especially being in that tier 3 slot, just isn't quite worth it compared to some of the other options that are available in that slot. So let's move on to the Recall Shocker, and I recently tried to use these again, and I was pretty unimpressed. I think they're getting a little bit of a buff again, so perhaps they're a little better now. And for that, I think I'll put them in the B tier. Maybe I'll even put them above the Artillery. I think because they have that recall ability, they're going to be very good, of course, at protecting all of your resource bases. And so for that, I think they're pretty good. However, there's just a lot of other options in the AoE damage category that I think are going to be a bit stronger than the Recall Shocker. The Recall Shocker, I think, is just a bit too slow for me. And I usually prefer slower decks as well. And this is just too slow for me, too. So For that reason, I gotta put it at the lower end of B probably here. But I think for the right person, this can be pretty good and pretty effective for what you want it to do. And so let's move on to the Steiner. The Steiner, I think I'll put this at the low end of A. The Steiner is very good at doing a lot of different things. It's going to be similar to something like the Wasp or the Hornet even, except I think it's a little bit better than those. The Steiner has pretty good range, it's got insane speed of course, and it's actually got really good DPS, single target DPS. So in the right hands, meaning if you're able to micro very effectively with these, and if you're able to multitask with these all over the map, they can do a lot of work for you. Let's move on to the Valkyrie here. And the Valkyrie, I think I'm going to have to put towards the top of S tier here. The Valkyrie is also getting a little bit of a buff today, making it even better at countering air units. And so it was already very strong and very good, and so now it's just going to be even that much better. And so as I've said before, the Valkyrie is the king of the air. If you have the Valkyrie and you have enough of these masked up, basically your opponent just can't go air against you. I think it's very strong just for the fact that it gives you that air dominance and air superiority. So I definitely think the Valkyrie is worthy of that S tier spot. So next up we have the Wasp, and the Wasp, I think I will also put that in the S tier, just below the recalls. The Wasp is very strong, very good in a lot of different situations. Obviously it's one of the fastest units, and it actually has a surprisingly high DPS and a surprisingly high durability as well, when you take into consideration how much it costs. And it's just so good in the right hands for someone who's able to multitask and maneuver a bunch of these all over the map, and you can be doing a million things at once with these, attacking your opponent's bases, their workers. You can even like run these around your opponent's main army to cut off their reinforcements and take those out. So the Wasp just has a ton of great uses for it, and for being in the tier 1 core unit slot and being so cheap, I think I have to put it in the S tier. And next up, we have a unit that I haven't used too often, but I can definitely see that it has its place. And so I think I'll put that, this is the advanced spot, and I think I'll put that at the top of B for now. The advanced spot is a tier 3 Starforge, advanced Starforge unit, and it can shoot both up and down, and it's very cheap. It only costs 50 matter and doesn't cost any energy, and so you could look at this as a replacement for whatever your tier 1 core unit would be, and it also has the added bonus of being able to counter air units, and it's the only anti-air unit that doesn't have an energy cost to it. And so next up we have something similar. We have the Assault Bot, and I think I'll put the Assault Bot at the low end of A, and just above the Advanced Bot, and I think the Assault Bot is just a little bit better. They are very similar. It can't shoot air units like the Advanced Bot can, but it's going to be just that much better at shooting against ground units. And so again, this can be basically a replacement for your tier 1 core unit, and you can pump these out, and they're just going to trade better and more effectively against your opponent's other tier 1 options, whether they're running gun bots or recalls or whatnot. The Assault Bot is going to be very effective against those. So next up, let's talk about the Beetle, and I'm gonna have to put that right above the Hunter in the C tier. The Beetle is just very similar to the Hunter. I think its stats might be a little bit better, but the Beetle is just, all around not going to be terrible. It's not going to be great, but there's just nothing special or unique about it. The stats are just fine on it. It just doesn't have any of those abilities to make it stand out like the Blink Hunter or Recall Hunter. So because of that, it's just an ordinary unit, and I think that's okay for the game to have some units that are just ordinary. And so for that, I think it is just fine in the C tier. Next up, we have the Bomber. And the Bomber, this is a tough one to place. I don't see these used too often, thankfully, and I don't like using them myself either. It's just not really my play style. But I think I have to put the Bomber, I think, right above the Sniper and behind the Dragonfly. And the Bomber is extremely fast and can do a lot of AoE damage very quickly. The downside or drawback of the Bomber is that it's pretty squishy, and once it dive bombs your opponent, it blows up and it's gone. All right, and so let's move on then to the Bulwark. And let's see, the Bulwark, I think I'm gonna have to put that in the B tier somewhere. How about I put it right here. So I've tried to use the Bulwark a bunch of times. I've seen it used a bunch of times. and I'm just always underwhelmed by it. Never seems to be quite as good as I think it's going to be. It's got pretty good damage overall, and it's versatile. It can shoot up and down. It's pretty tanky as well. However, I don't know why, but it just seems lacking always. It's very slow. It doesn't have that good of range, and so it just ends up losing to a lot of other anti-air units. So for me, in my opinion, it's just not quite worth it. Next up, let's talk about the Destroyer. And I really like the Destroyer. It's one of my favorite units. And I think I'm going to put it right above the airship here. And it's basically the only unit that's like a direct counter to the other durable ground units, the other tank units like the Crusader and the Mammoth. It's the only like direct counter to them. Single target DPS units can kind of deal with the tank units, but the tank units are very tanky, and so I found it to be very nice and very effective to have these destroyers and to quickly dispatch of your opponent's tank units, and it always catches people off guard, and they don't realize just how quickly their tank units die to these destroyers. And so next up, we have the Heavy Ballista, and the Heavy Ballista is going in the S tier, right above the Valkyrie and right below the Mortar. So the Heavy Ballista is a pretty tanky unit, and it's pretty mobile, especially compared to the Mortar, of course, and it's got just insane AoE damage. And so because it's in the tier 3 slot, I'm putting it a little bit below the Mortar, because a lot of times it's just a bit more difficult to get to that tier 3 slot. So I try to take that into consideration when I think about the power of these units compared to each other. And so the Heavy Ballista to me is just the ultimate AoE damage unit, and I think it's a ton of fun to use. And if you can mass up enough of these, they're going to mow everything down. Let's go on to something kind of similar, the Cat Bus. I almost want to put into the S tier. I think I'll put it in the A tier. The Cat Bus just has crazy damage against ground units. It's not as versatile as something like the Locust, but it's going to be much better at what it's supposed to do, which is just decimating all of the ground units. The only drawback to it is just how slow it is, and it doesn't have the greatest range to it. So for that reason, I think it is held back a little bit and doesn't quite make the S tier, but I think it's very close. And next up, we have the Mammoth. The Mammoth, I think I will put just ahead of the Behemoth and below the airship, I think. The Mammoth is very strong, very good. It's just that super tank option. Very good and strong frontline. And the thing I like the most about the Mammoth is the range. It's not crazy long range or anything, but it's just enough that you can sometimes shoot over your opponent's tank units and shoot the back line sometimes. So it just kind of depends on what your opponent's running and whatnot, but it's nice to have a little bit of range on these tank units because then they aren't getting bunched up on each other so much. They are much more free then to attack the targets you want them to attack then. So for that reason, I think they're very strong and worthy of the A tier here. Let's move on to the Raider here. The Raider, I'm going to have to put that in C tier as well. I think I'll even put them below the turret. The Raiders are very good at doing what they're supposed to do, which is destroying the enemy's workers. Unfortunately, that's pretty much the only thing that they can do. So next up, we have the Swiftshocker, and I think I'm going to put the Swiftshocker in the A tier here, right below the Behemoth. And so the Swiftshocker is a very good AoE damage option. It's very fast and has pretty good range on it as well. So you can get around with this thing all over the place and really make some big plays with it and outplay your opponent. You do need to be very careful with it though, as this thing is very squishy and can die very quickly to some of your opponent's units. So you just need to be careful with it and use it as more of that hit and run option. So it can be very good in that situation. However, it's going to struggle quite a bit against your opponent's tanky units. The things like the Mammoth, the Behemoth, the Crusader, all those are going to be very tough for the Swiftshocker to deal with and to take down. So for that reason, I got to put it just a little bit below those. And, I think there's just a few other options that are a little bit better than the Swiftshocker. But in the right hands, it can be very useful. Next up, let's talk about the Crusader. And the Crusader, I'm going to put just below the Behemoth and Mammoth. And it's going to, basically provide the same function as those units as well. It's a super tanky unit. I think it's the tankiest unit per cost, basically. And it actually has pretty good DPS on it as well. Single target, of course. It is also basically a melee unit as well. So because of that, I think it falls a little short of the Mammoth and Behemoth because it's just a little harder to maneuver this around and get it to, target what you want it to target without getting, stuck or hung up on some of your opponent's units. So for that reason, I think it falls just a tiny bit short of the other tanking options. But still, I think a very good and strong unit worthy of the A tier for sure. And last but not least, we have the Shocker. And the Shocker, I think I'm going to have to put this in the S tier and put it right below the Falcon. One of my favorite units in the game. It's just got really high AoE damage, and it's got decent range. It's got decent speed. You know, it's not that quick. It doesn't have that much range, but it's got just enough, in my opinion. And the damage on it is just so high, and it's even a little tanky as well. So you're definitely not going to be wanting to use this as any kind of tanking unit. You don't want this in the front line or anything like that. But you know, it can take a few shots from your opponent before it gets destroyed. So you know, in my opinion, it's the second best AoE damage unit for the tier 2 slots. And overall, I think it's just one of the best units in the game, and falls just a little short of the mortar and the heavy ballista. But it's my favorite AoE damage unit to use, and so I think it's definitely worthy of the S tier. This tier list was massive, as you could tell, and as I look over it here, I'm pretty happy overall with the way it turned out. I don't really think there's too much that I would move around. I think the ones that are standing out to me right now, if anything, I would move the Scorpion and the Advanced Blink up a little bit. And, actually, I think I'm going to do that. I'll put the Scorpion and Advanced Blink up a little bit here. Actually, now that I think about it, I'll even put them ahead of the Destroyer as well. I think they're definitely very good and very strong units. I don't think there's any other changes that I'd make right now. I'm pretty happy with that. Of course, I think my opinion is bound to change with the new patch that's coming out. And so we'll see how that all develops over time, and how the meta changes with all that as well. So anyways, that's going to do it for me on this one. Thank you again so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon in the next one.